Psalm 37, trust in the Lord. Every evil scheme falls apart in silence. There are seasons in life when the world appears to be ruled by deceit. Wicked men prosper, lies are celebrated as wisdom, and those who walk in truth often seem to stand alone. In those moments, Psalm 37 becomes more than just scripture. It becomes a map for the soul, a divine instruction on how to live in a world where darkness pretends to reign. David's words are not mere poetry, they are survival instructions for the faithful. Do not fret because of evildoers, nor be envious of those who do wrong. Within that single line lies the heartbeat of spiritual resilience, the call to trust in the Lord even when everything visible seems to reward the wicked. Psalm 37 reveals a pattern of divine justice hidden beneath the noise of human schemes. It teaches that the righteous do not need to fight with noise or vengeance. They fight by silence, faith, and steadfast trust in God's timing. While evil burns quickly like dry grass, the roots of the righteous go deep into eternity. The psalm whispers a sacred paradox. In a world obsessed with winning by power, the true victory belongs to those who wait quietly upon the Lord. This reflection is an invitation to rest in that divine silence, to stop wrestling with what God has already promised to destroy, to learn how to let go of anxiety and trust that every evil plan collapses under the weight of divine justice. What follows are 5 great truths drawn from Psalm 37, 5 spiritual pillars upon which trust in the Lord is built, and through which every dark scheme eventually falls apart in silence. The quiet power of trust. The human heart naturally seeks control. When faced with betrayal, manipulation, or the prosperity of the wicked, our first instinct is to act, to prove, to expose, to fight. Yet David's counsel begins not with movement, but with stillness. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and feed on his faithfulness. This is the first command. It does not tell us to react to the wicked. It tells us to anchor ourselves in God. In a culture addicted to proving innocence and defending worth, this trust becomes a rebellion against fear itself. Trust is not passive resignation. It is active confidence. It means choosing to believe that God sees what men try to hide. It means understanding that silence before injustice is not weakness. It is a weapon forged by faith. When you trust in the Lord, you refuse to be dragged into the chaos designed to destroy your peace. You rise above it. Evil feeds on reaction. It starves in stillness. Every scheme crafted against the righteous depends on their distraction. That is why Psalm 37 calls us not to fret. Because the moment you begin to fret, you feed the fire that evil set to consume you. The quiet trust of a believer disarms the entire architecture of wickedness. Imagine Joseph, sold by his brothers, falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, forgotten in prison. Yet not once did he rush to expose his accusers. His silence was not born from fear, it was born from foresight. He knew that what God was building in secret could not be protected by arguments or defenses. It could only be protected by trust. When God finally lifted Joseph from the dungeon to the palace, every lie fell apart under the weight of divine truth. The same happens to every believer who chooses trust over turmoil. Psalm 37 reveals that silence is not absence. It is alignment. When you trust, you align yourself with divine timing. The wicked rush because they know their time is short. The righteous wait because they know eternity belongs to them. The wicked plot, manipulate, and lie, thinking that silence equals surrender. But silence before the Lord is not surrender, it is strategy. It is the moment when heaven prepares to overturn what hell built. The psalmist writes, "Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for him. Do not fret because of him who prospers in his way." Rest and patience are not delays, they are the soil of miracles. To trust in the Lord when the wicked seem to prosper requires supernatural vision. It means seeing beyond the visible reward of sin and understanding that every deceit has an expiration date. Evil rises quickly because it has no roots. The righteous may seem to grow slowly because their roots reach into eternity. God's justice does not hurry because it never fails. The schemes of men collapse not by human effort, but by divine orchestration. Every lie eventually contradicts itself, every hidden motive becomes visible, and every deceitful path leads to self-destruction. The believer's task is not to expose darkness, it is to keep their lamp burning. When you trust in the Lord, you learn to let silence do what words cannot. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop fighting battles that God already declared finished. You realize that silence is the language of those who walk with heaven's authority. Jesus himself stood silent before his accusers, not because he lacked power to speak, but because he was already winning in the unseen. His silence shook the courtroom of eternity. When he remained silent, truth began to speak louder than any word uttered by his enemies. Every believer who walks through betrayal, slander, or hidden plots will one day face this divine test. Will you trust God enough to remain silent? Will you choose the stillness that looks like defeat but hides victory within it? To trust is to let go of the urge to defend your name and allow God to vindicate it. For it is written, "He will bring forth your righteousness as the light, and your justice as the noonday." Light does not argue with darkness, it simply appears, and the darkness disappears. This is the essence of Psalm 37. Trust does not ignore injustice, it transcends it. It does not close its eyes to evil, it sees it through God's perspective. To trust in the Lord is to declare, "I may not understand the timing, but I know the author. I may not see the outcome, but I know the one who writes the ending." And that faith, that deep, unshakable trust, becomes the silence that makes every evil scheme fall apart. For when God is your defender, no lie can last long enough to outshine his truth. So let your trust be quiet but unmovable. Do not waste your voice on arguments meant to drain your spirit. Spend your strength in doing good, not in proving good. Feed on his faithfulness, not on fear. For the Lord delights in those who trust him, and no scheme of the enemy can stand before the delight of God. If this message has spoken to your heart, remember, this channel is dedicated to helping you walk closer with truth, faith, and divine peace. Subscribe now, and continue this journey of spiritual wisdom and strength with us. The fall of the wicked is written in silence. There is something profoundly unsettling about watching evil succeed, especially when you have walked in righteousness and received little but hardship in return. The mind wrestles with questions that pierce the soul. Why does deceit win while honesty struggles? Why do the proud rise while the humble remain unseen? Yet Psalm 37 begins to dismantle this illusion of unfairness. For they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. It is not poetic exaggeration, it is divine law. Every scheme, every deception, every manipulation that stands against God's will carries within itself the seed of destruction. Evil carries its own death certificate written in silence. The world often mistakes noise for strength. The wicked thrive on display. They make grand shows of power, spread rumors, manipulate appearances, and construct illusions so convincing that even the faithful begin to question whether God still governs the world. But while the noise grows louder, God is quietly writing the end of their story. He is patient, not because he tolerates evil, but because his justice unfolds in dimensions beyond human time. When he acts, it is not partial, not emotional. It is complete. The silence of God is not absence. It is precision. The same stillness that calmed the storm on the Sea of Galilee is the stillness through which he dismantles every wicked plot. The psalm reveals that the prosperity of the wicked is temporary, deceptive, and self-consuming. When David writes, "I have seen the wicked in great power, and spreading himself like a green tree in its native soil," Yet he passed away, and behold, he was no more. He speaks not of metaphor, but of memory. He saw tyrants rise and vanish. He saw the proud fall by the very schemes they created. What they thought was triumph became their trap. The Lord does not need to shout to end wickedness. He simply allows the weight of truth to collapse every false foundation. It is silence that ends the storm, not argument, not vengeance, not revenge. Silence, in the hands of God, is the sword that cuts through every illusion. The believer who understands this truth stops fearing the noise of evil. They recognize that what looks like dominance is often the last gasp before destruction. The devil's greatest weapon is intimidation. He amplifies the success of the wicked to plant despair in the heart of the righteous. He wants you to believe that truth has lost and deceit has won. But God allows this illusion to test faith, to separate those who trust in outcomes from those who trust in Him. The psalmist repeats the command, "Do not fret because of evildoers." Fretting means letting fear rewrite your theology. It means allowing the appearance of injustice to cloud the reality of divine order. God's silence is not neglect. It is the stage of revelation. There is a reason why evil cannot last. It is built upon lies, and lies demand constant maintenance. The wicked must always defend their illusions, sustain their falsehoods, and silence truth. That effort becomes their undoing. Like a spider weaving a web to catch another, they eventually become entangled in their own deceit. God's justice does not require visible thunder. It operates through the quiet laws He wrote into creation itself. "Be sure your sin will find you out," says the Scripture. Evil's downfall is inevitable because it fights against the structure of reality, and reality belongs to God. The righteous do not need to chase vengeance, for vengeance is already woven into the design of truth. To trust in the Lord, therefore, means to accept His silence as proof of His sovereignty. The delay of judgment is not denial, it is design. God gives time because He is merciful even to the wicked, offering space for repentance. But when repentance is refused, that same time becomes the instrument of destruction. The longer they build their empire of deceit, the heavier their fall will be. The psalm says, "The wicked plots against the just and gnashes at him with his teeth. The Lord laughs at him, for He sees that his day is coming." God's laughter is not mockery. It is perfect awareness. He sees the end that evil cannot imagine. The Lord laughs not because the wicked amuse Him, but because their pride blinds them from the pit they are digging. When evil rises, the righteous are called not to panic, but to persevere. The faith that survives confusion becomes the bridge to divine revelation. God often hides His justice in time so that faith can grow deep roots. If He exposed the wicked immediately, trust would never mature. But when you wait upon the Lord, when you refuse to take vengeance into your own hands, when you continue doing good despite the noise of deceit, you enter into a mystery. God begins to fight your battles in ways you cannot see. You sleep while He rearranges the circumstances. You rest while He removes obstacles. You pray while He confuses the enemy's plans. And then one morning, as David wrote, "I sought Him, but He could not be found." The wicked vanished not through confrontation, but through divine replacement. The fall of the wicked is not always visible. Sometimes it happens internally. Peace is taken from them. Their mind becomes restless. Their schemes turn against one another. Their alliances break, and their hearts grow cold under the weight of guilt. That is divine judgment too. God can ruin an empire by removing its peace. He can end a conspiracy by dividing the hearts of those who conspired. He can make evil collapse without a single shout. The silence that follows such collapse is the sound of divine order returning. When God acts, He does not need an audience. He simply speaks within time what has already been written in eternity. For the believer, silence becomes the highest form of warfare. To stay still when provoked, to bless when cursed, to remain calm when misrepresented, That is not passivity. It is participation in divine power. When you choose silence, you are saying to God, I trust you enough to handle what I cannot. And that trust invites heaven to act. The wicked depend on your reaction. They provoke, lie, and manipulate to draw you into the battlefield of emotion where you will lose strength. But when you refuse to descend to their level, when you remain grounded in peace, their weapons lose their purpose. You cannot be defeated by what you refuse to feed. The silence of faith is not empty. It is filled with divine presence. It is the silence of Jesus standing before Pilate, the silence of Daniel in the lion's den, the silence of Moses standing before the Red Sea. In each moment, silence became the echo of trust. They did not need to speak to prove that God was with them. The result proved it. You may be in a season where your name is misused, your motives twisted, your kindness betrayed. You may feel the urge to speak, to justify, to explain. But the Spirit whispers through Psalm 37, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him." Let the silence of trust be your statement. Let time reveal what words cannot. Every evil scheme carries its own expiration date, and the believer's task is to wait until it expires. God does not just end the plans of the wicked, he uses them to prepare the righteous. The hardship that comes from being targeted by deceit is not wasted. It becomes the anvil upon which your faith is strengthened. Joseph's brothers plotted to destroy him, but their plan delivered him to the very place of destiny. What they meant for evil, God turned for good. Every betrayal becomes a staircase, every false accusation a bridge. The pain that was meant to break you becomes the proof that you were chosen for something greater. The silence of trust allows God to turn enemies into instruments. The wicked fall because they cannot sustain the weight of peace. Evil thrives in turmoil. When God removes chaos, they suffocate. The righteous, however, flourish in stillness. Mark the blameless man and observe the upright, for the future of that man is peace. Peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of God in the middle of it. It is the eternal reward of those who trusted through the storm. The wicked may rise like a flood, but peace remains after the waters recede. When you walk in peace, you are already walking in victory. Psalm 37 also teaches that the inheritance of the righteous is not merely spiritual, but practical. The meek shall inherit the earth, and shall delight themselves in the abundance of peace. Notice the sequence. First comes inheritance, then delight. The Lord does not just preserve the righteous, he restores them. The land that the wicked thought they owned returns to those who waited. The influence that was stolen returns purified. The voice that was silenced returns amplified. Trust becomes the door through which restoration walks in. And when God restores, he does it quietly but completely. You may not see the wicked fall in public, but you will see the fruit of their fall in your peace. When you rest in God, he begins to elevate you in ways that require no explanation. The tables turn not through confrontation, but through confirmation. The very same people who doubted you will one day witness the outcome of divine justice. And when that day comes, you will not need to celebrate the fall of others. You will simply glorify the faithfulness of God. For every downfall of the wicked is a reminder that God's promises stand unbroken. The believer must learn to detach from the desire to see revenge. Vengeance belongs to God because only he can execute it without corruption. Human vengeance always contaminates the soul. It binds you to the same darkness that hurt you, but when you release vengeance, you reclaim freedom. To forgive is not to justify evil, it is to free yourself from its echo. You are not required to forget, but you are called to rise above. The psalm does not say, fight against evildoers. It says, do not fret because of them. God's justice is not delayed, it is deliberate. Every delay refines the righteous, and every silence deepens their strength. It is a mystery that those who harm you are often the ones who push you closest to God. The pain they cause becomes the path of purification. Their betrayal teaches you to rely on divine presence more than human approval. Their schemes reveal who truly stands with truth, and when the moment of reckoning comes, you will realize that God used the wicked not to destroy you, but to redefine you. They became unwilling instruments of your transformation. What they built against you fell apart not because you fought harder, but because you trusted deeper. There are times when the silence of God feels unbearable, as though he has forgotten justice altogether. But in those moments, remember the words of verse 7, "Rest in the Lord." Rest is not inactivity, it is sacred trust. It is the acknowledgement that God's unseen hand is already at work. Faith does not demand evidence, it becomes the evidence. The world sees silence as defeat, but heaven calls it preparation. The fall of the wicked begins the moment you stop fighting in your flesh and start resting in your faith. When David says, "The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord, and he delights in his way," he is declaring that nothing happens outside divine arrangement. Even when you stumble, you do not fall, because the Lord upholds you with his hand. Evil may seem to trip you, but it cannot make you fall. The wicked may wound your reputation, but they cannot steal your destiny. God's hand is not seen, but it is sure. The righteous do not stand because they are strong. They stand because they are held. Trust transforms the battlefield into holy ground. The downfall of evil is often poetic. What they dig for others becomes their own grave. What they build for themselves becomes the weight that crushes them. It is written, "The wicked have drawn out the sword and have bent their bow, to cast down the poor and needy, to slay those who are of upright conduct. Their sword shall enter their own heart, and their bows shall be broken." This is not mere metaphor. It is the law of spiritual reflection. Whatever is launched in hatred returns multiplied. Whatever is built on deceit collapses under its own lies. Evil is self-consuming because it cannot exist apart from opposition, and once it faces the silence of trust, it devours itself. Trusting in the Lord, then, is not only an act of obedience, it is a declaration of victory. When you rest, you proclaim that God is greater than appearances. You declare that no scheme can outrun divine justice. You testify that silence can be louder than accusation. And when you live this truth, heaven begins to move. Your peace becomes a weapon, your stillness a shield, your trust a storm that uproots the wicked in silence. One day, all the noise of evil will vanish. The world will awaken to divine order once again, and those who trusted in the Lord will shine with unshakable peace. Until that day, walk quietly but confidently. Let your heart be still, for God is not sleeping. He is writing justice into the very fabric of time. And while the wicked shout, the righteous shall inherit the earth in silence. If these words have strengthened your faith, remember to subscribe to this channel and join this journey of spiritual reflection and divine truth, where together we learn how to trust, wait, and rest in the perfect justice of God. The righteous are preserved in the hidden hand of God. There is a sacred mystery in the way God protects his people. It is not always visible, and it is rarely loud. Divine protection is often disguised as delay, silence, or even apparent defeat. The righteous walk through valleys that the wicked avoid, yet they come out refined, not ruined. Psalm 37 unveils this unseen dynamic. The Lord knows the days of the upright, and their inheritance shall be forever. They shall not be ashamed in the evil time, and in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. The righteous are not promised exemption from trial. They are promised preservation through it. Evil plans may surround them, but God surrounds the evil itself with his invisible boundary. That is why every wicked plot, no matter how calculated, ultimately collapses. Not because it lacked power, but because it ran into a wall of divine protection unseen by human eyes. This hidden hand of God operates beyond logic. To those outside, it may seem as though the righteous are losing. Their resources dwindle, their names are attacked, and their paths grow narrow. Yet within this hiddenness lies a secret. What appears as loss is divine positioning. The Lord never protects his people by removing them from storms, but by fortifying them within the storm. Like Daniel in the den, like Shadrach in the furnace, the righteous find that protection is not escape, it is endurance wrapped in grace. The lion's jaws may open, but God closes their appetite. The fire may roar, but it refuses to consume. This is the preservation that silences evil, not by confrontation, but by divine contradiction. Evil is allowed to act, but its outcome is reversed. To walk in such faith requires a heart purified of the need to understand. Understanding demands clarity. Faith thrives in mystery. The believer who insists on seeing before trusting will never grasp the power of Psalm 37. The steps of a good man are ordered by the Lord. Order does not always look like progress. Sometimes God's order takes you backward so that he may prepare you for a higher path. Sometimes he hides you when the world expects your rise and reveals you when your enemies have already declared your end. The wicked think they have cornered you, unaware that God has simply redirected you. You are never trapped, you are being trained. The hand of God is not only a shield, it is a sculptor. Every moment of pain becomes a tool of refinement. What the enemy builds to destroy your peace, God uses to deepen your dependence. The more the wicked plot, the more God polishes your soul. He turns accusation into humility, betrayal into discernment, and suffering into strength. Nothing is wasted. When David says, "Though he fall, he shall not be utterly cast down, for the Lord upholds him with his hand," he speaks as one who has lived under divine contradiction. David fell, yet he was not forsaken. He sinned, yet he was restored. He was hunted by Saul, yet crowned by God. The pattern of the righteous life is not linear triumph, but cyclical redemption. Each fall becomes the foundation of greater faith, and each attack becomes a prophecy of future victory. Those who trust in the Lord learn that his silence is never neglect, it is instruction. God teaches in whispers. When you do not hear him, he is teaching you to see him. When you cannot see him, he is teaching you to feel his presence without proof. This intimacy is built only in silence, for noise feeds the flesh, but silence strengthens the spirit. Evil speaks loudly, seeking to distract. God whispers, seeking to deepen. To dwell in that silence is to abide under the shadow of the Almighty. It is the invisible sanctuary where fear loses its voice. Many of the righteous fail to recognize that their preservation often takes the form of separation. God will allow betrayal to detach you from those who cannot walk with you into your next season. He will permit misunderstandings to remove false alliances. What feels like rejection is sometimes divine protection. The schemes of the wicked expose what peace tried to hide. God uses conflict to purify your circle. The more you grow in faith, the smaller your audience becomes, for the crowd cannot handle the calling. The fewer the hands around you, the clearer the hand of God becomes. The psalm reminds us, "Depart from evil and do good, and dwell forevermore." Dwelling forevermore is not a promise of comfort, but of constancy. It means that those who choose goodness endure beyond the noise of the wicked. Divine preservation also demands surrender. Many believers ask for protection, but resist obedience. Yet obedience is the highest shield. The wicked schemes often succeed temporarily because they exploit the impatience of the righteous. When you step outside God's timing, you step outside his covering. Preservation belongs to those who trust enough to wait. To wait is to worship in silence. To wait is to declare that God's plan is better than your defense. David learned this truth in caves, not in palaces. He could have killed Saul when opportunity came, but he waited. That waiting was not weakness, it was worship. It proved that David's trust was not in the sword, but in the Lord of justice. And because of that, Saul's kingdom fell apart while David's was established forever. The wicked are terrified of time because it exposes them. The righteous are anchored in time because it reveals them. Evil must rush to maintain illusion. Righteousness can rest because truth does not expire. You may feel hidden now, overlooked, forgotten, or silent. But remember, the hidden season is the holiest one. When God hides you, He's building the kind of strength that can carry glory without corruption. If He revealed you too early, the weight of visibility would crush you. But in the silence, He strengthens your roots. And while evil grows tall, your roots grow deep. When the storm comes, shallow trees fall. But those rooted in trust remain unmoved. The hand of God also governs justice in ways unseen. When you are wronged, you are not called to balance the scales. You are called to trust the one who built the scales. Every injustice becomes a divine receipt, and God always pays His debts. You may not receive your vindication in public, but you will always receive peace in private. That peace is the signature of divine preservation. To lose peace is to step out of trust. That is why the enemy's first goal is not to destroy your reputation. It is to steal your peace. If you lose peace, you will act in flesh. But if you guard peace, you disarm the enemy. Peace is the silent armor that makes every fiery dart harmless. When the psalm says the Lord shall laugh at the wicked, it reveals something profound. God's laughter is not mockery. It is sovereignty expressed through serenity. He laughs because nothing escapes His design. Every wicked thought, every hidden motive, every word spoken in secret is already accounted for in the divine script. There is no surprise in heaven. God's laughter declares, I am still in control. And when you align your heart with that truth, you begin to share in that laughter, not in arrogance, but in assurance. You start to see evil's efforts as futile, its noise as temporary, its schemes as self-destructive. You no longer react, you simply rest. Preservation also includes provision. The psalm declares, in the days of famine they shall be satisfied. Famine does not just mean the absence of food. It symbolizes scarcity in all its forms, scarcity of hope, of truth, of goodness, of peace. Yet the righteous are fed not by circumstance but by faith. When everything dries up, their well does not run empty because its source is divine. God's provision is not always abundance, it is sufficiency. He gives you enough to sustain, enough to endure, enough to keep believing. He turns little into legacy. Elijah learned this when ravens brought bread, and a widow's jar never ran out. The hand of God multiplies what the world calls nothing. That is the quiet miracle of trust. The righteous often feel tension between visibility and validity. They wonder if silence means irrelevance. Yet God does His greatest works in obscurity. The womb is dark before birth. The soil is silent before harvest. The tomb is closed before resurrection. Silence is the birthplace of transformation. When God hides you, He is protecting the process. You may not be seen, but you are being shaped. Every unanswered prayer is a chisel. Every delayed promise is a hammer. The hidden hand of God does not simply preserve, it prepares. And when He finally brings you forth, you will not need to explain how you survived. Your peace will speak louder than your story. Sometimes preservation looks like unanswered prayers. God will deny requests that would destroy your focus. He will close doors you thought were divine opportunities. He will withhold relationships that would derail your calling. These denials are not rejections, they are redirections. The wicked chase every open door, but the righteous wait for the one God unlocks. Trust means believing that His no is as sacred as His yes. The psalmist writes, wait on the Lord and keep His way, and He shall exalt you to inherit the land. The exaltation of God comes after the education of waiting. To be preserved by God also means learning how to live unprovoked. Evil thrives on attention, and the righteous must starve it of that fuel. The moment you respond in bitterness, you validate the enemy's lie. The greatest power you have is the power to remain calm. That calmness is not apathy, it is mastery. It shows that your emotions no longer dictate your obedience. When you reach that level of trust, you walk in authority that silence itself commands. People begin to wonder how you remain so unshaken amid chaos. They do not realize that you are not standing on circumstance but on covenant. You no longer react to life. You reveal God through it. The Lord's preservation often moves through paradox. He hides you from harm by exposing you to pressure. He teaches humility by allowing humiliation. He builds courage by sending fear. To the untrained eye, these look like contradictions, but to the faithful, they are confirmations. Every paradox of pain conceals a deeper promise. When God allows the wicked to touch your life, it is never to harm you, but to reveal his strength through you. Job lost everything, yet he gained revelation. The attacks of Satan became the theater of God's glory. The silence of heaven became the stage of restoration. The same will be true for those who endure without breaking trust. God's preservation does not always prevent storms, but it guarantees safe passage through them. The Lord will not leave him in his hand, nor condemn him when he is judged. The righteous may stand before human courts, but divine justice stands behind them. When others speak against you, heaven listens differently. The accusations of men cannot outweigh the advocacy of Christ. The world judges by appearance, but God judges by alignment. As long as your heart remains aligned with truth, no verdict on earth can overturn your destiny. You may lose temporarily, but eternity always restores what time seemed to steal. There is something powerful in the phrase, "The Lord knows the days of the upright." It means that nothing surprises him, not your tears, not your fears, not your failures. Every day of your struggle is already written into his mercy. That knowledge brings freedom. You do not have to control outcomes when the author already knows every chapter. You simply live within his script, trusting that every pause, every silence, every waiting season is purposeful. The wicked write their own stories with deceit and end in destruction. The righteous live the story written by grace and end in glory. The preservation of the righteous is not about being untouched by trouble. It is about being untouchable by despair. Evil can wound the body, but cannot reach the soul that trusts. Fear may whisper, but faith answers louder. The storms may rise, but they can only strengthen what they cannot destroy. Preservation is not the absence of attack, but the guarantee of survival. You may bend, but you will not break. You may cry, but you will not collapse. You may stumble, but you will not sink. For the Lord upholds you with his hand, and when the time of deliverance comes, it will come quietly. The wicked will look for you in the place they left you and find you gone. The snare they built will remain empty. The voice they tried to silence will speak again with greater power. This is how every evil scheme falls apart, not by confrontation, but by disappearance. You outlast what was meant to outsmart you. You rise not by reaction, but by revelation. God's preservation is not to make you untouchable, but unbreakable. This is the quiet triumph of Psalm 37. The righteous live in a realm the wicked cannot understand, a realm where silence is strength, waiting is warfare, and trust is victory. They move through life with serenity that defies logic. They are preserved not by absence of danger, but by the presence of purpose. The wicked cannot comprehend how they survive. That confusion is itself a sign of divine protection, for what God shields cannot be explained. It can only be witnessed. In the end, the silence of trust will always outlast the noise of deception. The righteous may walk alone, misunderstood and mocked, but their end is peace. Mark the perfect man. and behold the upright. For the end of that man is peace. Peace is the final proof that God has preserved you. It is the sound that follows when every evil scheme collapses. It is the echo of heaven's laughter in the soul of the faithful. If this message has deepened your faith and reminded you of God's quiet protection over your life, remember to subscribe to this channel so you can continue walking this journey of divine wisdom, faith, and inner peace with us, where every word spoken becomes a step towards stillness, trust, and the everlasting victory found in the Lord. When the righteous are silent, heaven speaks. There comes a moment in every believer's journey when words no longer suffice. When explanations fall like dust and defense becomes futile, it is the moment when God draws you into silence, not as punishment but as proof of maturity. In this world, people equate silence with defeat, but in the kingdom of heaven, silence is the language of power. Psalm 37 teaches that when the righteous choose stillness over strife, heaven itself begins to speak on their behalf. Commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. He shall bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. This verse is not a metaphor, it is divine mathematics. When you stop fighting in your flesh, God multiplies his voice through your stillness. To commit your way to the Lord means to surrender your instinct to control outcomes. It means placing your reputation, your relationships, your future, and your vindication into the hands of a God who sees the end from the beginning. The wicked scheme, network, and manipulate. They rely on visibility. The righteous commit, trust, and rest. They rely on invisibility. The true battlefield is not on earth, but in the unseen, and whoever commands silence there commands victory here. Silence confuses the enemy because he cannot interpret it. He thrives on noise, on gossip, reaction, and defense. But when you remain silent, you starve the devil of information. You let heaven do the talking. Think of Jesus before his accusers. They demanded answers, they hurled insults, they staged false witnesses, and yet he remained still. Every silence from his lips was a thunderclap in the spirit. That silence shook kingdoms because it declared something greater than self-defense. It declared sovereignty. When you are silent under persecution, you are not surrendering control. You are displaying trust. You are saying, my vindication is not a debate to win, but a promise already written. In those moments, silence is not absence. It is alignment. Heaven hears it as worship. Hell hears it as defeat, and the world eventually recognizes it as strength. The reason most people fail in spiritual warfare is because they underestimate silence. They believe victory must always be loud, public, and immediate, but Psalm 37 reveals a different pattern. God does not crush evil through argument. He lets evil implode under its own weight. The believer's silence allows that process to unfold undisturbed. Every time you resist the urge to respond, to retaliate, to prove, you shorten the lifespan of evil's illusion. The wicked live by the attention they provoke. Deprive them of it, and they decay. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Fret not yourself in any wise to do evil. The instruction is simple yet divine. Your calmness is their collapse. In the quiet heart of trust, heaven begins to articulate its will. God's justice is not a reaction, it is a revelation. When he brings forth your righteousness as the light, he is not adding something new, he is unveiling what was already true. The timing of that unveiling is his, not yours. The sun does not rush to rise. It appears exactly when the earth is ready to receive its light. In the same way, your vindication will break forth precisely when your silence has finished its work. Every second you choose stillness over speech, your light grows brighter in the unseen realm. The righteous who walk in this understanding no longer live for applause. They have tasted the serenity that comes from letting God defend them. They have learned that silence does not weaken testimony, it sanctifies it. The man who defends himself may win arguments, but the one whom God defends wins generations. Abraham said nothing to Pharaoh, yet God struck the palace with plagues until truth surfaced. Moses stood silent before the Red Sea, yet God spoke through wind and water. Daniel uttered no defense before the lions, yet his silence roared louder than their hunger. Such is the paradox of trust. The less you speak, the louder heaven becomes. But silence is not easy. It feels like surrender, because it is surrender, the surrender of ego, of fear, of the craving to be right. It demands a death of pride. When David wrote Psalm 37, he had lived this death, hunted by Saul, betrayed by friends, accused of crimes he never committed. David's silence was not passive, it was prophetic. He understood that the same God who anointed him would also vindicate him. To speak out of hurt would have placed him on the same level as those who plotted his ruin. By staying silent, he remained above their reach. The Lord shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them, because they trust in him. Silence was his shield. The believer's silence is not the absence of words, but the presence of wisdom. It is knowing when to step back so God can step forward. Many people prolong their battles because they refuse to stop talking. Every reaction resets the spiritual clock. But when you rest, you release heaven's intervention. To be quiet in the face of injustice is not cowardice. It is confidence that God's timing is perfect. Evil burns itself out while good endures. The psalm reminds us that the arms of the wicked shall be broken, but the Lord upholds the righteous. Broken arms symbolize broken strength. What they built by manipulation collapses by exhaustion, while the righteous stand upheld by unseen power. When you are silent, you give space for revelation. God begins to expose truth without your effort. The same mouths that spoke lies will contradict themselves. The same systems that opposed you will dismantle themselves. God's justice often looks like coincidence to those who don't understand timing. People will call it karma, chance, or irony. But you will know it was the orchestration of divine silence. The Lord moves subtly without spectacle, yet his results are undeniable. The wicked vanish, and behold, they were no more. No announcement, no warning, just disappearance. That is what happens when heaven speaks on behalf of the silent. Yet the believer must understand that silence does not mean disengagement. It does not mean you stop praying, stop believing, or stop acting with righteousness. Silence before men must coexist with speech before God. You may be silent on earth, but your heart must roar in the throne room. There, in prayer, your cries translate into power. There your tears become testimony. There your stillness in public becomes strength in private. When you pray without resentment, heaven aligns circumstances to your favor. When you choose forgiveness over retaliation, you authorize God's intervention. Silence is not a void, it is an invitation. The wicked often interpret your silence as weakness, believing you are defeated. Let them. Their misinterpretation is the trap that God sets for their pride. They continue plotting, unaware that their every move fulfills prophecy. In their haste to destroy you, they dig their own graves. Evil does not realize that God uses its energy to fuel the righteous. The more they speak, the deeper they fall. The more you rest, the higher you rise. For the Lord loves justice and does not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever. Preservation is not protection from storms, but continuity through them. You may be bruised, but you will not be broken. Silence is also the birthplace of revelation. The mind that is still before God begins to perceive truths hidden to the restless. When you stop explaining your pain and start observing it in his light, wisdom grows. The same trial that tempted you to speak becomes the classroom of divine understanding. You start to see that God allows the noise of accusation to test the maturity of your faith. If you can remain calm when your name is dragged through mud, it proves you trust the one who wrote it in heaven. Your value is not determined by rumor, but by revelation. When you know that, you can walk through slander with serenity. Psalm 37 is not a call to inaction, but to higher action. The silence it commands is not void, it is creative. When you refuse to answer evil with evil, you create space for good to manifest. Every act of restraint is an act of creation. You are building peace in unseen places. The world may see you as quiet, but in the spirit you are constructing foundations that cannot be shaken. The wicked build towers of noise, the righteous build temples of silence. When the wind of judgment blows, towers collapse but temples remain. That is the destiny of those who trust. There is also a deeper layer to silence. It trains your perception of God's voice. When you stop reacting to human chaos, you begin hearing divine cadence. The whisper of the Spirit becomes clear in the absence of noise. Many miss God's instruction because they are too busy defending themselves. Their ears are filled with arguments instead of assurance. But when you surrender the need to be understood, you gain the ability to understand God. His directions become detailed. You begin to sense His hand, turning what was meant for evil into training for glory. Every betrayal becomes a blueprint. Every loss becomes latitude. You see the patterns of providence where others see pain. In that awareness, life ceases to be random. You realize that the wicked are not obstacles but instruments. Their plots push you into positions you would never have chosen. Their lies force you to build character. Their rejection forces you to refine purpose. Without them, you might have settled for comfort instead of calling. God uses them the way a potter uses pressure. He shapes through resistance. The harder they press, the clearer your form becomes. Silence allows that shaping to happen without shattering. You do not fight the hands that mold you. You trust the heart behind them. When you begin to see from that height, forgiveness becomes natural. You understand that revenge is redundant because justice is inevitable. God does not need your help to balance scales. He already owns them. Every secret conversation, every hidden trap, every whispered lie has an appointment with exposure. The righteous do not chase truth. Truth finds them, and when it arrives, it carries peace as proof. Vindication that costs you peace is not from God. True vindication restores rest. It leaves no bitterness, no residue, only quiet gratitude that the Lord fought for you while you held your peace. The righteous silence of trust is also contagious. People around you begin to sense calm where chaos once reigned. Your peace becomes prophetic. Those who once doubted your patience will eventually seek your wisdom. Your stillness becomes a sermon louder than shouting. In a world addicted to outrage, the person who refuses to react becomes a mirror of divinity. That is how you transform environments, not through argument, but through atmosphere. When you carry peace, you shift rooms. When you refuse to speak evil of those who hurt you, you change the spiritual temperature. The enemy loses oxygen where peace reigns. The greatest miracle of all is that silence not only defends you, it transforms you. It refines your motives until all that remains is love. When you no longer crave to be right, you become righteous. When you no longer need to be seen, you become luminous. Silence erases self so that God can be revealed. It turns the heart from victim to vessel. The longer you remain silent before Him, the more your inner noise dissolves, and what emerges is serenity that cannot be imitated. Evil cannot replicate peace. It can only counterfeit noise. That is why, in the end, every evil scheme falls apart. Not because the righteous shout louder, but because peace outlasts pretense. The quiet inheritance of the faithful, there is a calm that the world cannot counterfeit, a stillness that no noise can imitate. It is the serenity of a soul that has walked through storms and discovered that the waves cannot drown what God has destined to float. Psalm 37 closes not in lament, but in victory, a quiet, steady victory that belongs to those who trust in the Lord. But the salvation of the righteous is of the Lord. He is their strength in the time of trouble. This is the heartbeat of the entire psalm. Evil rises, noise fills the air, accusations echo through corridors of power, but in the end, only those who waited remain. The righteous inherit not merely land or comfort, but peace itself, that most unearthly possession which no scheme can steal. Every promise in this psalm points toward endurance. The wicked are like sparks, bright for a moment, gone before dawn. The righteous are like embers, quiet, constant, unextinguishable. Their strength lies not in resistance, but in surrender, not in argument, but in alignment. To inherit peace, one must first learn to dwell in silence. The soul that cannot be still cannot receive. God's greatest gifts come wrapped in stillness, because only silence has the patience to unwrap them. When the Lord says the meek shall inherit the earth, he is not speaking of timidity, but of mastery, the mastery of the tongue, the temper, the impulse to retaliate. Meekness is disciplined power. It is the warrior who has learned when not to draw the sword. Those who walk with such hearts discover that inheritance is not seized, it is received. The wicked rush to acquire, grasping with fear that time will run out. The righteous wait, knowing that eternity never hurries. Each day of faithfulness deposits unseen treasure in the soul. They may have less in hand, but they carry more in heart. Their wealth is trust, their abundance is contentment. While the world exhausts itself chasing visibility, they are being prepared to rule quietly. For in the kingdom of God, authority belongs not to the loud, but to the faithful. The Lord tests the strength of silence before granting the stewardship of sound. It is a divine irony that those who seem powerless are often the very ones holding the keys of destiny. Look through Scripture and you find the pattern repeated like a hidden melody. Joseph in prison, Moses in exile, David in caves, Daniel in captivity. Each appeared forgotten, yet each was being fashioned for eternal influence. God hides his heirs in obscurity because glory grows best in darkness. The wicked build platforms, God builds character. The righteous endure invisibility because they understand that exposure without preparation is ruin. The inheritance promised in Psalm 37 is not won by striving, but by surviving the silence. The silence, however, is not empty. It is the crucible where desires are purified. When you have waited long enough for God's justice, the lust for vengeance evaporates. What remains is compassion even for those who harmed you. You begin to see the wicked not as enemies, but as lessons. Their success was permitted so that you could learn detachment. Their fall will be allowed so that you can learn mercy. The righteous who inherit the earth must also inherit God's heart. Without compassion, possession becomes corruption. That is why the Lord delays reward. He is not withholding blessing. He is enlarging your capacity to hold it without pride. The end of evil comes not with explosions, but with exhaustion. Wickedness consumes itself. It cannot rest, and therefore it cannot endure. Every scheme must be maintained by deceit, and deceit drains the soul. Sooner or later, the architect of lies grows weary, while the one who trusts in truth grows stronger. This is the slow, silent justice of God. The righteous outlast the wicked simply by refusing to depart from peace. Their consistency becomes judgment. Their serenity becomes sword. In the courtroom of time, it is patience that testifies loudest. Wait on the Lord and keep his way, and he shall exalt thee to inherit the land. The verse does not promise escape from trial, but elevation through it. To wait and keep his way is to keep walking even when nothing changes. It means planting seeds in ground that looks barren because God said it will bloom. It means praying when words feel dry, forgiving when memory still burns, blessing when no one notices. Every small obedience adds weight to your inheritance. God measures destiny not by moments of triumph, but by minutes of trust. While others are counting outcomes, He is counting endurance. And when the appointed time arrives, He reveals the fruit that has been growing beneath the soil of silence. The inheritance of peace is not theoretical, it transforms the mind. Anxiety loses jurisdiction over those who trust. They cease to live by headlines or rumors. Their confidence is not in circumstance, but in character, the unchanging nature of the one who promised. They can look at chaos and still smile, not because they are naive, but because they see further. The horizon of faith stretches beyond the visible. Where others see threat, they see theater. God is staging revelation. Every storm becomes scenery for grace. That is why Psalm 37 insists, "Fret not yourself." To fret is to shrink the horizon of hope. The believer expands it by remembering that divine justice does not move by human clocks. When you live from that awareness, gratitude becomes your default state. You begin to notice how every disappointment contained direction, how every silence hid safety, how every loss carried instruction. What once felt like delay now looks like design. You realize that the reason evil did not destroy you is because it never controlled the script. Even its attacks were edited by grace. Nothing touches the righteous without passing through permission. That understanding produces rest deeper than sleep, a rest that survives heartbreak, betrayal, even unanswered prayer. It is the rest of knowing that God's hands have never let go. Peace as inheritance also means freedom from comparison. The righteous no longer measure progress by the pace of others. They are content to walk at God's speed. They do not envy. They observe. They do not compete, they complete. Envy is the confession that you doubt God's fairness. Trust is the declaration that His timing is perfect. To inherit the earth is to inherit perspective, to see from above what once frightened you below. When you live there, you discover that evil's power was always borrowed, noise was always temporary, and silence was always sacred. But this inheritance carries responsibility. The earth that the meek receive is not land to dominate, but soil to heal. God entrusts influence to the peaceful because they will not abuse it. Those who have learned restraint will govern with mercy. The quiet hearts become bridges between justice and grace. They speak softly, yet their words reshape nations. They act humbly, yet their actions echo through generations. Their influence endures because it flows from peace, not pride. When Scripture says their inheritance shall be forever, it means that what they build will outlive applause. The structures erected in silence become sanctuaries long after noise fades. The believer must therefore cherish the hidden seasons rather than curse them. The silence you despise today is the womb of tomorrow's authority. Every unanswered prayer, every door that refused to open, every night you wept without witness, all were chapters in your training for eternal inheritance. God cannot trust shallow faith with deep responsibility. The more you wait, the more weight He gives. And so He hides you until you are heavy with peace, until you can walk into promise without trembling, until you can hold blessing without boasting. When that moment comes, your elevation will not announce itself. It will simply appear, the way dawn replaces darkness. Sometimes God allows you to see the downfall of the wicked, not for satisfaction, but for sobriety. I have seen the wicked in great power, David writes, and spreading himself like a green bay tree, yet he passed away, and behold, he was not. The sight is meant to remind the righteous that strength without surrender is short-lived. Every fallen tyrant preaches a silent sermon, build nothing that heaven cannot bless. The righteous learn from the wreckage, they do not rejoice over it. Their hearts grow tender, not triumphant, for they know that without grace they too could have become what they now outlive. Humility is the crown of those who survive with peace intact. It is here that Psalm 37 reaches its quiet climax. Mark the perfect man, and behold the upright, for the end of that man is peace. The end, not the beginning. Life does not judge you by your noise at the start, but by your silence at the end. Peace is the signature that you have walked faithfully through every contradiction. It is the evidence that evil failed to infect your heart. When all is said and done, peace is the only proof of victory heaven requires. It means you have learned the rhythm of trust, that you have stopped fighting what was already conquered, that you have become one with the calmness of God Himself. This peace cannot be faked. It has a fragrance, a stillness that follows the faithful like morning dew. Wherever such a soul goes, conflict loses energy, arguments fade, rooms grow quieter. That is the inheritance manifesting. The righteous carry within them the atmosphere of heaven, and wherever they dwell becomes a fragment of Eden restored. This is why the earth longs for the manifestation of the sons and daughters of God, not for their miracles, but for their peace. The world is weary of words. It is waiting for silence that heals. Even in death, the righteous are not defeated. Their peace outlives the body. The wicked leave noise behind, the faithful leave fragrance. Generations later, people will remember them and feel calm without knowing why. Their memory becomes melody. This is the immortality Psalm 37 promises, not merely existing forever, but influencing forever. When you live by trust, you sow serenity into time itself. Your children, even those not yet born, will walk in roads paved by your patience. Such is the power of one life aligned with divine stillness.